saying, well, this is how it'll work. The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. And in studying this, I looked up that word, overshadow you. And Luke only uses that word one other time in the whole of his gospel. And he uses it in the occasion that's recorded in Luke chapter 9, verse 34, the transfiguration of Jesus. Here the text says that a cloud overshadowed them, the disciples and Jesus, as a voice declared to them, "This is my Son, my chosen. Listen to him." And so both of these occasions in Luke, the one with Mary and the other with the disciples on the Mount of Transfiguration, both of them convey a time of a holy, divine presence, bringing forth truth and initiating for the reader an introduction to Jesus Christ. One is looking towards the introduction in the Incarnation. The other, in the Mount of Transfiguration, is looking towards the revelation of Jesus Christ in the crucifixion. Overshadowing, indicating that God is at work in this and he has a great plan being revealed. But back to this Annunciation. An article by Karen Pryor in The Atlantic points out the Annunciation offers an invitation to Mary to give a very modern turn to a very pre-modern event, specifically verbal consent. And not only verbal consent, but informed verbal consent. Now, you can go to a college or a university campus, and they will have safety policies. And they will have codes of conduct for intimate behaviors from the student body and between student bodies. And such policies require gaining responsible verbal consent from individuals who would be involved. So you can go to college freshman orientation gatherings and expect that you're going to learn things like where the library is and when the dining hall is open. But you'll be left to figure some of those things out on your own, because what's more important these days is to know the school policy on verbal consent. And then it's not just enough to not say no, you have to say yes. And most remarkably, considering the times that this story in Luke chapter 1 is recorded, in ancient Middle Eastern cultures, they were not known at all for their justice towards women or needing to gain female consent on anything, and certainly not when it came to childbearing. But here, remarkably enough, incredibly enough, way back then and there, God stoops to gain the consent of an unwed girl, informing her both of procedure and of the identity and future of the child that would be conceived. The child to be born will be holy and will be called the Son of God. And before anything happens to make this happen, God, and just consider how utterly remarkable this is, God waits for consent to be given. That God proposes human involvement in this project, and then he waits for his solicitation to be responded to. Now we know, of course, Mary's celebrated response in verse 38, "I am the Lord's servant. May it be unto me as you have said." And the entire world should rejoice at those words that, yes, Mary said yes. Surely, although asked and informed, she could not have possibly understood all what she had consented to. And that's the theme I'd like to put to you this morning. As to who of us who have ever agreed to God's working in our lives, our surrendering ourselves to the control of God, surrendering our lives to his will, who of us ever fully understand or can even imagine exactly what it is we have consented to? My point is that God's intention and Mary's simple, "we'll let it be," is a radical declaration of consent worthy both of our rejoicing and also of our emulation. I imagine that were some Midwestern girl out in Missouri or Minnesota to offer a paraphrase of verse 38, it would not bear some of the dignified verbiage of, "May it be unto me as thou hast said," but it might be rendered more in the cultural vernacular expressions of a Minnesotan, such as, "Yeah, sure, that'll be fine." Or a Missourian, "Well, okay then." Well, okay then. But in any case, disciples are welcomed, invited to consent to God's working in our lives. And Mary, in a most profound way, embodied consent and now challenges us, those who receive her child 9 months later on Christmas. We are also then to accept our agency in God's intentions for what is best for us and His desire for our salvation and His lordship in our lives. Actually, honestly, we don't know exactly how long it took Mary to respond to the angel. The text doesn't tell us. It may or may not have been immediate, but it did happen. The important reality is that she did submit herself and gave her consent to God's having His way with her and His use of her life. And through this, we know God has brought great blessing. And He has done marvelous things through her, that Christ was born and our salvation has come to pass. So let me ask, perhaps even today, you may be, or maybe even just by virtue of this message this morning, you may begin to ponder a response to God regarding some aspect of your life, of your faith, of your future. That in light of the Annunciation, and in light of Christmas, and in light of the ending of 2017 and the dawning of 2018, what consent is God waiting for in your life? What consent is God waiting for you to give regarding your life? Is there an area of your life, a habit, a practice, a priority, or a pattern where the Lordship of Christ has been held somewhat at bay, and He's waiting for you to let Him in, waiting for you to agree to His access to an area of your life? Or is there a choice that you know He has placed on the table, a choice that He is waiting for you to make? Maybe it's as significant a choice as answering His grace and His words to you in your baptism. And it may take years and years for us to answer those baptismal words of God to us when we were baptized as a child. But He's waiting, and He's patient, and yet He's waiting with eagerness to hear you say, "Yes, I know that I belong to Jesus Christ." Is He maybe waiting for you to accept His grace and His forgiveness in an area of your life that until now you've sort of kept His forgiveness away from you? Maybe there's an aspect in which you're not yet willing to turn over your life to Him to take control of that area of your life. Or Or maybe you've made a profession of faith and yet your life has not yet lived up to that profession, and He's waiting for your consent. Is there, on the other hand, maybe a responsibility that He is presenting to you for you to take up? Or a responsibility that He's asking and waiting for you to refresh? Maybe it's as simple as a particular classic spiritual discipline, maybe like practicing Sabbath, or solitude, or silence, or fasting, or tithing, or prayer. Maybe asking you to serve this coming year as an elder, or as a deacon. Maybe anticipating and waiting for your developing of family devotions at home, or maybe reading through the Bible, or volunteering for Kids Hope, or as a young life leader, or even just as a nursery coordinator. The question is, maybe there's an area in your life that God is waiting for you to surrender to Him. Waiting for you to give up some long-held bitterness and to offer the refreshing gift of forgiveness to someone from whom you have been withholding it. Is He asking you to let go of some anger? Waiting for you to let go of some bitterness? To relinquishing your grasp on some dearly held issue? Is He looking for you to surrender an obsession, surrender an addiction, and to say yes to the way of the Lord in your life? Whatever it may be. A challenge, behavior, perspective. The glorious thing is that God will work out His plan in your life. And He will do the heaviest lifting. And He will bring the grace, and He will bring the means, and He will bring the results, and He will receive the glory. And you, as we end 2017, as we begin 2018, you know God's current interests, His current questions, His current challenges in your life, and His matters of faith and discipleship for you. And you know what He's challenging you with. And yes, admittedly, who of us ever know that when we agree to God's working in our lives, when we agree to the surrendering of the control of our lives to our blessed King, who of us ever fully comprehend what we're getting into, where it will lead, or what implications will follow? But nevertheless, our lives are in good hands, and good hands are a good place for our lives to be. So consider Mary as an archetype of believers, one who hears the word of the Lord, consents to it, and then prepares herself to begin living with all of the blessed implications and results of having said yes to the Lord. May it be to me as you have said. Well, okay then. It was the right thing for Mary to say then. And I would suggest it's the right thing for us to say today. Well, okay then. It's always the right thing to do. May we know God's blessing in the year ahead. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.